And I have another letter here from Eric. It says, "Good afternoon, James and Brian." How does he know it's afternoon? It's not. You guessed wrong, Eric. Hope all is well with you and yours. I hope you know I love your show and love you guys also, but I have a minor bone to pick with you about EV range. So he's buttering us up before the criticism. You see how that works? I want to express my opinion that the only consideration about what constitutes adequate EV range should not be the size of James's bladder, which we just found out is small because I had a pee break in the middle of the show. It's not that small, but I'm trying to drink more water, Brian, and it affects me. And let me say, at the risk of providing too much information, that I have a small and getting smaller bladder. So I understand that. I bought a Model Y a couple of years ago. That's from Tesla, the crossover SUV. I'm retired, and so I finally have time to ski. For the past several years, I have skied about 28 to 30 days a season. That sounds like fun, a good life. I don't have a place to stay in Tahoe. I think he's from the Bay Area, Eric. So I just day trip each time I ski, something I would probably do to save money. Also, my wife complains to me about stopping so much to charge when we go on long trips, like to Southern California. I bet there are plenty of husbands out there who aren't going to buy an EV simply because they don't want to give their wives, you call them partners. Well, we call them partners because Brian and I aren't actually married by ceremony. We have life partners, but we haven't done that. Although my partner would probably like to be married and put a ring on her finger because all of the women at her work have rings on their fingers. So it's a problem for me. I might have to do something about that. So that's another reason to complain. He says, "I don't think that it's too much to ask the car makers to offer cars with the same range, real range, not the fake advertised Tesla range, as my Toyota Tundra. Another less rational reason to offer EVs with adequate range has to do with people's perception of EVs, and I agree with you, Eric. One example of what I'm talking about is the neighbor of mine. She believes strongly that we are causing global heating. She has gobs of money and can certainly afford to buy an EV, but won't, due to mostly because of the range issue. Yeah, the older people are, sometimes the harder they are to change their minds. I can understand that. I truly wish I could say to her that EVs now have the same range as an ICE vehicle, but I can't. Another neighbor has an EV, but she says she'll never give up her ICE vehicle because of the range issue. You know, there are, I'll interject here, there are like Lucid Air, and there are a few kicking around North America that you can buy with ridiculously long range.
Super long range, yep.
That would be certainly more than some ICE vehicles, if not many of them. Thanks again for all your hard work on this podcast, this very entertaining and informative podcast. And he's from California. Eric, thank you for writing us, Eric. I don't think we disagree as much as you think we do, because Brian and I, when we say something like, you don't need range, we're talking about the future, what we know is coming down the line. We know 5-minute charging is coming because it exists, you know, in real life in China, and it'll come here. So that changes the game a little bit. Your wife may not be so upset if you charge for 5 minutes, but I fully support you wanting an EV that has that range. I know there are different use case scenarios, and I do agree that it would allow for more EV adoption. It just probably isn't as necessary as most people think it is, including your neighbor.
Yeah, it's more of a perception issue than a real issue. I can totally understand why people would think, oh, I'm going from this gas car that has, you know, X amount of range, and then the EV, you look at the stat and it's way less. But of course, like 99% of the time, it's just not an issue because you just drive around town, you charge at home every night. It's just the occasional road trip. And of course, there are people who are, you know, drive millions of miles a year, and maybe it's an issue for them. So, you know, it's more of a perception thing, but, you know, perception is a real issue. It will stop people if that's the perception.
Yeah, I do believe cars can be the same range as combustion vehicles. Certainly, a plug-in hybrid PHEV would be good for somebody who doesn't. And a lot of people, even in China, are going for those types of vehicles, maybe because of their perception. And in China, you're just like 200-300 kilometers of range in some of those PHEVs. And then you never use that gas engine unless you're going on a long trip. Now, in Eric's case, he could have probably had, in North America, they're around 100, 150, depends on the vehicle, maybe less even. But they're
the electric range.
The electric range of a plug-in hybrid, so that you can use use it as an EV most of the time, and then and a lot of people don't know those exist, but it's basically an EV most of the time. And then when you do go to Tahoe, then it kicks in and you don't have to stop, generally speaking. But a lot of people will be okay with like 600 kilometers of range or 370 miles. Brian and I are, in our cases, would be fine. I'm even surviving on a lot less than that. But yeah, it's a pain in the butt. You got to force the family to, if I was going skiing 30 times a year, I wouldn't want to stop. But I, do one summer vacation and I don't mind taking it easy and stopping and charging even in our car. But there are, 1,000-kilometer range vehicles, 1,500-kilometer range vehicles. That's like 930 miles. They will make them for the people who want them. And I always tell people to buy the biggest battery they can. Now, I live in Canada, the coldest part of Canada, pretty much. Like, it gets down to minus 40 here. So that's hard on the batteries. Now, having said that, there's more batteries that are coming. CATL was just testing batteries at the Shanghai Auto Show. They had the battery at minus 40 degrees on display, showing that it still had its power. And they took more power to keep it at minus 40, I'm sure, than what was necessary. But they were demonstrating that works. So even in our use case scenario, which is rare compared to most of the world, we will still have a solution for that. So a lot of times when we talk on the show, we know what's coming. And, generally we talk in the terms of not going out and buying an EV today, but in terms of global adoption of electrified vehicles. We know that all these problems, any problem you can think of, Eric, is solved. Your problem solved, because China will have cars that are 1,000 or 1,500 kilometers, which seems incredibly excessive to us because you have to carry that around all the time. So you're going to pay more for your electricity. But if that's what does it for you, then fine. Plus, you also have to buy a big battery because batteries degrade. Over time, you might lose 10% in 5 years. You might lose even 15% in some batteries. That's getting better as well. So, but at least you don't have to worry about it. So I say, if you buy the biggest battery, when I give people advice, I say buy the biggest battery you can, and you won't be sorry. And that's usually the case. But we live in a cold climate.
Yeah, and some of the solid state batteries that are coming out look like they're going to be a lot lighter. So carrying around the weight of a 1,000-kilometer range car, if the battery is, say, 40% lighter, is not going to be as much of an issue. But yeah, it reminds me of, televisions. TVs are getting so big now, and they're getting so cheap. And so if anybody ever asks me, what size television should I get? I always say, get the biggest one you can afford. Like it's the same thing with cars. Get the biggest battery you can afford. Get the biggest TV you can afford. There's no such thing as a TV that's too big, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and they are becoming as big as walls. I went to Walmart for the first time in a long time the other day. And I was kind of curious because my wife was looking for something in the electronics department. And sure enough, there were 65-inch TVs there. And I was kind of curious what the biggest one that they carried was, but that happened to be it. I'm sure it's larger in the States.
Yeah, no, there's now TVs 100 inches and more. But the problem is then you can't get them in your house. Like, there's no way I could get a 100-inch TV into my home theater in the basement. And it's a problem for reviewers because I sometimes read, tech reviewers. And they're like, I wanted to review this 100-inch television, but I do all the reviews in my house, and there was no way I could get it in my house.
The Chevrolet Silverado EV, which Eric could go buy if he wanted to, has about a 500-mile range or 792 kilometers. So
that's really good.
Yeah, I noticed that because, pickup truck is, once you have a load or you're towing, it goes down greatly. So that's the reason why they've increased that so much. And people, I watched one local person here who was very happy with his Silverado. He'd had a Tesla before, but in living in this cold climate, he occasionally ran into problems with range. And yeah, he said the Silverado it's perfect. It solves everything. Now, maybe you don't need that much range if you're not towing in a warmer climate. Maybe you do, or maybe you want it. But it's there. I mean, it is there. It's not ubiquitous, but we're starting to see cases of longer range batteries. So I just looked that one up while you were talking. Yeah, but generally, if you stop for after 4 hours of driving for a 10-minute charge, and I can see a car that can make it to Tahoe just with that and a lot of backup range, and then you charge at Tahoe, because I assume you're spending the day there. I don't know how long you're spending there, but ski resorts are starting to have chargers, level 2 chargers. I was thinking if you're there for like 3 hours, you could have like a 25 kilowatt hour DC fast charger, because I know there was a few of those out in British Columbia with the local power company, and I thought it's kind of a weird area, 25 kilowatt hour charging. Maybe it's out of date technology, but I thought it's a good use case maybe for like a grocery store or other places that you might spend a couple of hours, or certainly a ski resort. So, but then a high level 2, like level 2 can charge up to 20 kilowatts in some cases, depending on the car. And for a commercial level 2 charger, that would probably do you too. For in 3 or 4 or 5 hours of being there, you would charge up and then you can go home. And maybe it'd be less expensive than DC fast charging as well, because it's a slower charge rate. So that's something to think about. Yeah, I just, I know that there's a lot of stuff coming. We kind of speak in terms of the best that is available, and we know what's coming and the problems in the, the challenges and the perceptions. Now, not everybody's going to, the Silverado is pretty darn expensive because it has a bloody big battery and it's a big vehicle, but it might be good for what Eric does, or people like Eric if they can afford it.